Hello, I'm David Root. Welcome to CPCC and You. In our continuing series of global issues, today we will focus on energy. Recently, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer for Duke Energy, Jim Rogers, spoke to the Charlotte World Affairs Council. On energy issues, he compared China to the United States.
My name is Mike Hawley. I'm chair of the World Affairs Council. It's very important that we have dialogue in our community about international issues. This is the place that it happens, the World Affairs Council. What we do is try to help our community and our members connect the big dots in what's becoming a very small world.
The world is getting to be a much smaller place, and global concerns are really critical. Many of you in this room think of us as your local utility. But an interesting factoid for you to think about is if you look at our top 50 customers and our top 50 vendors, 90% of those companies are global companies. And that says a lot about kind of how the world is evolving and how globalization is working. What I would like to do today is talk to you about climate change and our company's position on that, but I wanted to put it in the context of what's going on in China. I have a 19-year-old grandson named Alex, and as he graduated from high school just several months ago, and before that I asked him, I said, Alex, if there's any place in the world your grandfather can take you, where would you like for me to take you? Kind of hoping he'd say, well, let's go fly fishing or play golf. He said, let's go to China. And I said, okay, let's do that. So we took Alex to China, the 12 days leading up to the Olympics. And as I thought about that experience, and it was purely for the fun of going to China, I read a lot of books to get up to speed because I've never been to China before. I've read a lot about what's going on. But in that 12 days, I learned a lot, but also it gave me an insight in terms of what we're doing in this country in terms of dealing with energy, environmental issues, and how we're thinking about our economy for the future. But I think these are my early impressions as I think about where we are in this country and where China is going forward. China has thousands of years of history, but this trip in many ways was like stepping into the future with many glimpses around every corner at the past. The cities, the growth, and the pace of the people I found amazing. If you've been there recently, if you've been catching some of the Summer Olympics coverage, especially the opening ceremonies, you know what I'm talking about. China is a nation that is making big things happen, not only economically, but environmentally. Let me give you a side-by-side comparison that sort of sets the stage. Geographically, they're about the same size as the U.S. They have 1.3 billion people compared to our 300 million. Their economy is growing at a much faster pace than our economy is. They have tens of millions of people migrating every year from rural areas in the country to the urban areas. Very similar to what happened in this country and is still happening starting in the early 1900s. They are in the process of providing universal access to electricity to everybody in the country, and that's what we did in the 20th century and got most of that work done by 1950 to 1960. But they have many people in that country that represent the 1.6 billion people in the world who have no access to electricity and no access to the modern world. I was struck by the scale, the scope, the speed, and I was told by one of my guides that the national bird of China is the crane. And as I looked across the horizon and I saw the construction cranes, it became clear to me what it meant. She also made the point that the national flower of the United States is the carnation. I said, really? I didn't know that. She said, yeah, carnation, which I thought was a great point. But what I'd like to do is compare the U.S. and China in terms of how they're going about it. But on our trip, we went to Beijing, and just before the Olympics started. We went to the Great Wall. We saw the terracotta soldiers at Xi'an. And then we cruised down the Yangtze River to the Three Gorges Dam, which has been under construction since 1994. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most remarkable facilities I've ever seen. When it's completed next year, not only will it be the largest dam in the world, but it will be the largest generator of electricity on the planet. Each year, the power churned out by the 26 turbines will be equivalent to that produced by 40 million tons of coal or 18 nuclear power plants. Let me put it in a local context. At 18,000 megawatts, that's the amount of generation that we have in the Carolinas to serve our 2.2 million customers. At working capacity, it will be 1/9 of China's energy will come from this dam. But what's even more remarkable is China relocated 1.2 million people to build it. Not just villages and farms, but small cities, monasteries, and temples. They moved to make that happen. Can you imagine in the U.S. us relocating 1.2 million people to build a dam? It wouldn't happen. But this was just hydropower. But China isn't leaving anything out of the energy equation. They consume 40% of the world's coal. They consume 2 times more coal than we do. 75% of the mainland China's power comes from coal. In the U.S., 50% of our power comes from coal. And actually, for Duke Energy, 70% of our power comes from coal. As we went down the Yangtze River, one of the things I found amazing, and my grandson said, "What in the world are you doing?" I was taking all these pictures of these coal barges. It was kind of interesting for me, not for him. But the interesting thing is that as I see the price of coal in the United States escalate, I recognize that a lot of our coal suppliers today are selling coal to China, which is driving up our prices. But they're not just using coal. And by the way, let me give you a stat that is kind of mind-blowing, and I can put it in a local context. They're going to build 800,000 megawatts of new coal generation in the next 8 years. Here's the way to think about that. That's 1,000 cliffside plants. And there's been, I'd say, a little controversy around our cliffside plant. But the fact of the matter is they're going to build 1,000 of them in the next 8 years. And we're only going to build one here in North Carolina, and we're going to shut down 1,000 megawatts of old high-emitting coal plants. They're not going to shut anything down because they need all that power going forward. So they are looking at nuclear, natural gas, renewables, and energy efficiency, and they're making it happen. The other thing that I found amazing, and one of the things I did was read the China Daily every day, which is their local English paper. They are the top manufacturer of solar panels today, and next year they will be the largest manufacturer of wind turbines in the world. The point I want to make with you is they are living the balanced portfolio approach to meeting future energy demand by using everything they have to generate electricity. They're making it happen. Here in the U.S., we're still only talking about it. Some people in this country say, let's ban all coal plants. In fact, 60 coal plants have actually been canceled over the last year. Some people say ban nuclear, even though we haven't built a new nuclear plant in over 30 years, and even though they have zero emissions of carbon. Some say only renewables should be built in the future, even though when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, you don't get electricity. Some say use gas to generate electricity, but at the same time they say, but don't drill for it in the U.S., don't drill offshore. And at the same time, they fail to recognize that natural gas has 50% of the carbon as coal. Other interesting fact is in the last 10 years, gas has become the crack cocaine of the power industry. Because when we ban a coal plant or we delay a nuclear plant and we need to build power plants, we build gas. The price of natural gas is going up 5 times. It's been incredibly volatile. And the fact of the matter is, it is more expensive to remove carbon from gas than it is to remove carbon from coal. I'm beginning to think in this country we're more in the category of being the chattering class rather than the can-do class. Because that is one of the things, as I looked at China, they put economic development first in everything they do. But let me quickly add, they are not totally ignoring the environmental implications of what they do, and the fact that they're going to be the leading manufacturer of solar panels and wind turbines tells you they have it clearly in their sights. By doing that, not only are they rapidly expanding their economy, they're creating the brain power and the technology infrastructure they need to address and solve their environmental problems coming up. It's my judgment, at the rate they are ramping up their clean tech efforts, the question that needs to be asked, will they blow by us? If so, when? And a lot of people say, well, look at their air, and the air wasn't pretty. And I will tell you, in 12 days I was there, and this is pre-Olympics, I only saw blue sky one day. But the fact of the matter is, there's a recent Yale study that said as a country's GDP per capita goes up, their focus on environmental issues increases and their ability to make things happen and deal with environmental issues increases. And I believe as their GDP per capita goes up, they will focus increasingly on environmental issues. We did in this country. If you think back about our history, anybody that came to the United States in 1890 to 1970 and went to Detroit or Pittsburgh or Chicago or Cleveland or any of the industrial Midwest and looked at what the air looked like and looked at the rivers in those areas during that period of time, it was clear that we put economic development first. And then with the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1970 and forward, we put an increasing focus on making sure that it's clean. But the fact of the matter is, China is moving fast and they are transforming, and they're implementing new technologies and developing technologies, not only to provide electricity, but to address environmental issues. The Climate Group, which is a group that is closely monitoring China's environmental progress, and which just released a major report on their clean revolution, says China is unleashing a low-carbon dragon. Already they are planning the world's first eco-city designed from scratch on an island near Shanghai. It will feature electricity-generating windmills and solar-powered water taxis. China's largest state-run power producer is developing a $1 billion coal-fired power plant with carbon capture and storage. They call it Green Gen. Let me just contrast that a moment with here in the United States. We recently canceled a similar project we called Future Gen. We also went to Chongqing, west of the dam, as well as Shanghai and Hong Kong. But I bet if I did a poll in this group and said, what is the largest city in China, you probably wouldn't say Chongqing. Beijing is not China's largest city, neither is Shanghai or Hong Kong. Chongqing is with 31 million people. Beijing is only 15 million. New York is 8 million with about 20 million in the metropolitan area, to give you some sense. You walk around these huge cities and you can see the skyscrapers that they're building and they will build in the future. I'm a great reader, so I went to a lot of their bookstores. Now, admittedly, I don't read Chinese. But one of the things I found remarkable is the focus they had on business books. I mean, they are very commercial, they're very focused. Everyone is into business. Even our guide had his own business on eBay. So, and most of the people, nearly all the younger generation speak English. And I'll make one sort of comment, and this is sort of a grandfatherly thing to say. In one respect, the energy and drive of the people reminded me of my parents and my grandparents and the work ethic they had. I think specifically about my parents, the sacrifices they made after World War II so that I could have what they didn't have. It was all about the betterment of your family, the betterment of your society, and quite frankly, it didn't take long for Alex, my grandson, to realize that it might make sense for him to study a year or at least work in the summers in China, because it's clear that their future is going to be inextricably linked with ours. Whether they're a competitor or a partner, they're going to play a key role in the world going forward. Tom Friedman said something once, and I'm going to paraphrase him, that I think is really an interesting point. In the 60s, when there was a cultural revolution in China, our parents told us to clean our plates because children are starving in China. He says today we should be telling our children and grandchildren, if they don't make A's in school, someone in China is going to take their job. And I think that is, my experience there validates that insight. I could talk hours about this, but one of the key takeaways for me that I want to share with you is what I call the can-do spirit that they have. This is the same spirit we have in this country. We had it at the beginning of this country. We had it during the Industrial Revolution in our country. We had it during the migration from the rural to the urban areas. And I hope we still have it today, because we're going to need it today. And that's the attitude of making things happen. I can only imagine when the Europeans came to this country in the 1900s and went to Chicago and saw how messy it was, or went to Pittsburgh, which was the leading steel-producing part of our country, and looked at all the smog and the fog in the air and what they said about us. Like, man, what a mess. They'll never clean this up. But in a sense, I felt that way going to China, but I know they're going to clean it up, because it's pretty clear that's clearly part of their focus. I believe, and this is just a working hypothesis that I've developed, is that we may in the future have more in common with China than we do with our European ancestors. Primarily driven by mindset and can-do attitude and commercial drive. And I think one of our great challenges is to find a way to leverage that. Yes, there's lots of differences in the governments, there's lots of differences in many ways, but at the end of the day, that underlying drive I find remarkable, and that's something that we need to kindle and continue to fuel within our own country. I believe their electric power industry will accomplish what we've been thinking and talking about since the beginning of this decade, and that's find a way to reduce carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, even though today they're the largest emitter in the world, and it's pretty clear they're on the track to significantly increase their emissions of CO2 in the future. It's my judgment it's time for us to move. We need to move towards solutions that bridge the gap from today's technology ideas to tomorrow's commercial solutions. Said in another way, we need to build a bridge from our high carbon emitting economy today to a low carbon future. During this transition, we need to use all of the fuels we have to produce electricity. We need to use coal, natural gas, nuclear, renewables, energy efficiency. There is no silver bullet. We can't afford to take any of them out of the equation. And my job is primarily, job one for me is to provide affordable, reliable, clean electricity 24/7. And I take those 5 ways of generating electricity and I compare them against the criteria of affordability and reliability and clean. And each of them have pluses and minuses, and there's no perfect one. The reality is each one of those alternatives needs further technological development to be an equal contributor in a low-carbon world. So we have much work to do to develop that technology going forward. We won't get this done in a decade. It's going to take many decades to get started. It took us over 100 years to get to where we are today. Some people tell me we need an Apollo project or we need a Manhattan project. I think those projects were important projects that got done, but the scope of them is small compared to what we have to do. I think the better way to think about this is what we need is a Marshall Plan for our country. In the same way we rebuilt Japan and we helped rebuild Germany, we need to rebuild our own economy, rebuild our infrastructure, our power infrastructure, and that needs to be job one for our country going forward. As the Chinese proverb says, a journey of 10,000 miles begins with a single step.
Thanks for watching this continuing series on global issues affecting Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and Central Piedmont Community College. For the crew here at CPCC Television, I'm David Rue. Thanks for watching.